Welcome back to the channel, guys. This is VIN3233. This is a 2020 paint code 083, which is ultra white with LA30 red interior. The most common color combination on these cars, white with red interior. Popped up for sale on Facebook Marketplace with 51,000 miles for $65,000 in Georgia. And it looks like it is a New Jersey titled car. Probably somebody that had a home in both places or something, because I see a lot of service where it's in both places too, but it is a one-owner car according to the seller, and so we'll dive into and look at that here in a minute. Production statistics: 648 out of the 2,348 cars that I've identified for the US 49 are ultra white. Very common to see. Out of those 648, 361 had LA30 or red interior, which is about 16% of the cars that exist came in this combo. As far as rarity goes, 1 out of 10. Very common. Usually when a white GSF pops up for sale, it's gonna have red interior. 2020, which is the second lowest production year, 187 cars were produced. 60 of those, or about a third of them, were white. And of those 60, 27 had LA30 red interior. So at its rarest, this car is one of 27, but only because it's a 2020. Otherwise, it's a pretty common color combination that you're gonna find on these cars. Carfax, Epic VIN, and AutoCheck. Carfax shows this as a one owner, two accident car. And the first one being November of 2020, and it actually still had paper plates on it at the time. It wasn't even officially registered to its first owner, but I think they had purchased it and it just had paper plates, temporary plates on it, which that happened November 9th, 2020. So right when it was new, it was in an accident. And it says to the right front. And then the second one is April of 2023, a side swipe accident and damage to the left rear. So to me, it looks like both the front and the rear bumpers have probably been repainted, and maybe the left rear quarter panel as well, maybe doors, who knows what else. Epic VIN shows this as a two owner, no accident car. And AutoCheck shows this as a one owner, one accident car that it's reporting that one in April of 2023 with no further information. But I think it's safe to assume this is a one owner, two accident car. And I think Epic VIN, I don't put a lot of weight behind the number of owners that it has. I usually just have that for data sales, auction sales, and photos. The previous sales, this car's in-service date was October 7th, 2020. It was put on sale August 12th of 2020 for $84,000 in Georgia. So the original dealer selling it was already discounting it, probably $6,000 or $7,000 at that time. Then it popped up on AutoTrader December 19th, 2022 for $72,000 with 33,000 miles. And I guess it never sold. And that may be why Epic VIN is reporting it as a second owner. When it saw another sale, it kind of assumed it sold, and it looks like it probably didn't because it remained with the original owner. And now, here it is, the last day of November 2025. Let's just call it December 2025. 51,000 miles for $65,000. So now onto the photos. The first thing that caught my eye when looking at the photos for sale here is this car has tires that are made by Arroyo. And so I've never heard of that brand. I figured it's probably like a Lionheart or a Ling Long or something like that. It's a tire that's been around for a long time, but it's like a $60 to $80 tire. I don't know why you would put less than $400 worth of tires for all four tires on a car that's worth $60-something thousand. Usually that is kind of give you some foresight into how these cars have been maintained. If you see these cars that have cheap Chinese tires or these are made in Thailand, just cheap tires on it, it kind of tells you how the rest of the vehicle's probably been maintained. And so we'll see when we get into the service history, but you know, that's kind of a little foreshadowing there. But considering this car has had accidents on both the front and rear end of the car, and maybe the side, I don't see any mismatched panels. So when it was done, it looks like it was pretty quality work, at least from the photos provided. Obviously look closely at that, but I don't see any misaligned panels, things like that would, you know, kind of sound the alarm bells. But I would say overall, it presents very well. I don't see any delaminating carbon fiber. I don't see any excessive bolster wear on the seats. Really just, it presents very well. Had you not known this car has been in two accidents, just looking at it, you probably wouldn't suspect that. And that tells you that it's probably been repaired pretty well. And so if you are gonna consider this car, definitely inspect that closely. As far as the price goes, this car, if it had no accidents, it's probably pretty close to where it needs to be, but because of the accidents, you kind of have to adjust down 5 or 6% for the first accident, another 3 or 4% for the second accident. So let's call it 8 to 10% is kind of what you need to adjust. That puts it in the upper 50s. And if this car had no accidents, 65 would be pretty close to where I would expect it to see at a dealer. But you know, this, as I said, upper 50s, maybe 60 grand is probably the max that I would consider. Again, it has very cheap tires on it. I would remove those immediately and put a quality tire on there. These cars came with Michelins. That's what a lot of people like to run, the PS4s. But you know, that's not a deal breaker, but that kind of tells you that this car, they tried to put the minimal amount of money into it when you start seeing tires like that. Speaking of service history, let's dive into it and see what we find out. So this car's pretty well dealer serviced, and it's also serviced after that by an independent mechanic. It looks like, as I said, it's somebody that had a home or, you know, stayed in at least New Jersey and Georgia, but it also had some occasional servicing in Florida, but kind of back and forth, and that's probably where all the miles came from, just traveling back to and from those two locations. It is currently registered to New Jersey, even though it's for sale in Georgia. The first entry of note is December 27th, 2020, right after Christmas and right after that accident in November of 2020. It already has 4,500 miles on it from when they bought it, so definitely been doing some traveling. They replaced the right front wheel, recalibrate the occupant classification calibration system, that's called the OCC or the OCS. That usually is triggered when the airbags have been triggered or blown. The Carfax did not say the airbags were blown here, but that would be something to ask about, especially because you're buying it from the original owner. They obviously should know what's going on here. In that same service, they also recalibrated the radar cruise control and a four-wheel alignment. So at a minimum, it kind of sounds like it hit a curb or ran over something on that right front corner, but I would definitely ask the owner what happened there and see if you can get any more information. March of 2021, tire pressure monitoring system issues related to that right front corner. So I would assume that maybe something didn't get switched over when they swapped over the wheel, something like that, but kind of related. And 2 months later, the alignment was still off, so they did another four-wheel alignment. So it sounds like whatever happened on that right front corner was giving some issues. July of 2021, the engine shut off while driving. The low pressure fuel pump was replaced. And for some reason, I see this a lot on the 2020s. I don't know why, maybe just like post-COVID build quality or something with whatever fuel pump they were using. But it seems like a lot of the 2020s have had the low pressure fuel pumps replaced. And so it's not a concern, but you know, it is just something of note that when you look at these 2020s in the service history, a lot of them have the fuel pump replaced. Between 2021 and 2023, it's basically just a bunch of oil changes. So the next entry of note is October of 2023 at 44,000 miles, a few months after that sideswipe accident, and it is a radar calibration. Headlights are reinitialized for the headlight leveling sensors as well. So I don't know if that's related, but you know, again, you're buying this car from the original owner. The original owner is the one that's selling it, so they should have information about these two accidents. 1 day later, also in October 2023, they replaced the left rear wheel and an alignment and the rear blind spot monitor and recalibration of that system. So that definitely kind of lines up with the side swipe to the left rear, because the blind spot monitoring, all the sensors in the bumper, a lot of that stuff sits behind the bumper. So not unreasonable to expect that you see something like this on there. June of 2024, which is the last service at Lexus, 45,000 miles, again with the tire pressure monitoring system issues. They said they need to diagnose, and they don't say what else was done there. So then on to the Carfax, there's two additional services. November of 2024, 47,000 miles, front pads, rotors, sensors, rear pads, rotors, and sensors, one wheel stud and one tire was replaced. So this car doesn't even have about 4,000 miles on all of its brakes. October of 2025, 50,000 miles, an oil change, tires rotated. So the brakes are fairly new. It looks like the tires are fairly new, but the tires are, you know, cheap tires. I would still look at the insides of the front tires to look for inner tire wear. Make sure you don't see any excessive inner tire wear on the fronts. If you do, that is signs that the lower control arm bushings need to be replaced. Front lower control arm bushings, two tires, and an alignment. So that can get kind of expensive, but it's something that kind of affects all of these cars. This being a 2020, it's really too new to see the valley plate issues, the valley plate leak pop up, but I would still do a pre-purchase inspection on this car and of course inspect the valley plate to see if it is leaking, because it eventually will. It's not right now, it's just too new for that. So from the photos, the carbon fiber looks good, but it is all original. I don't see anywhere in the dealer paperwork, in the dealer service, where it has been replaced. So if you're gonna take this car to a cold climate, which it sounds like it probably spent most of its life in Georgia, but it was back and forth Georgia to New Jersey, which is cold. If you take this to a cold climate, the very first cold night you have, if it's even starting on one corner to delaminate, it can make the whole panel get delaminated very quickly. I would inspect the prior damage. Ask the owner, see what information they have on it. Satisfy yourself that you're happy with how the repairs were and the damage. Other things of note, you have the 60,000 mile service coming up pretty soon. That's spark plugs, brake fluid, inspect everything. I would do the transmission service. I don't see where that's been done. The torque vectoring differential, don't see where that's been done. The 2017 through 2020s had the leaking internal oil seal on the shocks, so they were subject to leaking even when they were brand new. They still, by 2020, didn't seem to have it sorted out, but there is an updated part now that they're not prone to leaking. When you're doing a pre-purchase inspection, see if the shocks on this car are leaking at all. They're not very expensive, and it's relative, but they're not very expensive to replace, but it is something you need to look at on these cars. This car is priced too high considering the accidents, considering it has cheap tires, and any other potential things, but it looks like it's pretty ready to go otherwise. The only way I would consider this car is if I got it for significantly less. And in my book, I would probably be looking at like 55 just to have room for replacing 4 tires. Putting Michelins on it, that's almost $2,000 to do that. So put four tires on it. It may need shocks. It may need lower control arm bushing, something else. I would get the transmission service done. I would get the torque vectoring differential done and get some money set aside for the 60,000 mile service. But that's really it. So it has potential to be a good one with the accident stuff aside. So the answer with this one would be, if you can get it cheap enough, then it still could be a pretty good buy. It has good bones, but there's just a lot of questions, I guess, with this one. Search around Georgia on Facebook Marketplace. If you're interested in this, just set your location to Georgia, and this should pop up for you when you just type in Lexus GSF. You can contact the owner that way. I don't want to post a link because then the link is only valid while the car's for sale, but I want this information to always be out there for potential future owners. So if you're interested, go track the owner down, Facebook Marketplace, VIN 3233. Thanks again for watching, guys. We'll see you soon.